All right, so we are live and people are coming in, I think.
Okay.
Aiden and Trish, welcome.
All right.
Yeah, they come. So I'm going to start pushing this to the other places. We're still aiming for a 6:30 start.
So where are we live, Scott?
We're just in Zoom at the moment. I'm just going to start pushing this to what will be the Oak Barrel Facebook and the Oak Barrel YouTube.
Okay.
So
And they are pouring in.
yeah. This is nice.
This is the bit of the tasting where I'm checking off names at the door. There's a bit of music playing in the back of the room.
There's usually a queue wrapped right around the store.
A little bit of housekeeping, bathrooms. You should
No,
know.
that's at 6:30. That's coming later. Housekeeping's coming later. This is more Simon's in the back, just like psyching himself up, talking to himself.
Doing push-ups.
Yeah, we're running around really late trying to get the tasting glasses out because we're always on time.
Yeah.
Yeah, a bottle turns up from Melbourne in pieces.
Yeah. I'm on the phone to logistics wondering where all the stock is.
Yeah. But you bring the tasting stock? Was I bringing the tasting stock?
No, we're just trying to organise 60 deliveries for tasting stock around the country.
Yeah. Oh, I tell you what, that day sucked. That day sucked.
Oh, dude.
We did, Dave, have a 28-year-old Old Mall smash for our last tasting. Very, very sad.
Yeah, that is quite sad.
What's the worst bottle that's ever smashed in transit in our own professional careers?
I had once, well, it wasn't, we don't know really what happened, but like about 7 cases of Adelphi go missing between Sydney and Melbourne. Sorry, Melbourne and Sydney.
Wow.
Yeah.
Not ideal.
Yeah, not essentially a smash, but video of it going onto truck, video of it not coming off truck.
Just a bit of a black spot in the camera between. I remember I dropped a Magnum of Krug when I had my first bar job when I was 18 years old, and that seemed like my world was ending.
That's pretty bad.
Yeah. I've since then made much bigger and more costly mistakes, but at that time that was the worst.
Yeah. I remember ordering a bottle of Lagavulin Distillers Edition to Neighbourhood, and we were pumped, a couple $100 bottle of whiskey, and it lasted about 20 minutes before it got knocked over.
Wow.
Going, oh, cool, there's a new whiskey, let's have a taste. So, yeah, in pieces everywhere. It was Matt Fitz who actually broke it. It wasn't me.
I mean, when we do the chat on housekeeping, do we need to talk people through Zoom, or is it like we're 2 weeks into this like quasi lockdown and Zoom's basically all that we do now?
Yeah. I don't know. I've had one phone call from someone saying it's not working, which was the owner of the Oak Barrel who got the time wrong about an hour ago. So
daylight savings again.
Yeah. Come on, let's go.
What's in your brew this morning, Dave?
Oh, it's the usual Lavazza. I've just finished it now, just the last dribs of it. Yeah, so Lavazza Rossa.
Nice, nice.
Just strong black coffee, trying to bring me alive, because it was 9:23 here.
I was drinking at 9:23 this morning.
You hadn't stopped from last night, Scotty.
Yeah. Does it count?
No, not at the moment.
Those days are behind me. I can't do that anymore. I'm past it. Right, I'm fully caffeinated. I'm ready to roll. Let's pour some whiskey. Oh, that's a good breakfast whiskey.
The only one of these I've tried is the Islay number 2.
Okay.
So
That's the only one you've tried so far?
So far in this lineup, yeah.
Oh, okay. The only one I really don't know is the Springbank. That's the, there were very, very few bottles of that around. Most of that went into, was split up into fractionals. So
Yes.
I wouldn't have been able
a lot
to
of them
find
went
a full
to
bottle of
China,
that.
and there was 15 bottles left.
That's right. Yeah. And I had just a wee babby one that I only opened yesterday. God, so chocolatey. Yeah. So I'm looking forward to the lineup's a cracking lineup. I mean, I love. I love all of these on here. I just don't know the Springbank, so we'll find out about that shortly.
I don't think I've had a bad Springbank, so quietly confident.
It depends where it sits in the lineup. That's what I find. For me, I mean, I like the refill bourbon and refill bourbon cask springers. I think that's sort of my bent anyway, rather than the sherry cask. I'm not a big sherry head.
And we're looking
team,
at sherry with this guy, aren't we?
Team, we have our first question through the Q&A. Will we ever see the Altmore in a tasting? And that's from Phil Brooks.
Yes. Well, we would have been doing it at the next oak barrel tasting, which we were lining up before the restrictions came in place. We would definitely bring Altmore back. I was as gutted as everyone at the tasting that we didn't get to do that. I'm yet to try it, so I'm ready.
Which Altmore's that?
It's a 28-year-old.
Oh God, that's delicious.
Yeah. Not sure what batch number it was.
I had that out in China at the Shanghai Whisky Festival out there, and the guys from Bacardi came over and said that's older than they could get their hands on.
Yeah. Well, when did Bacardi sort of take Altmore back over? Fairly recently.
It's about 4 years.
Well, they released it as a single malt in 14, so they bought it a little bit earlier than that. 2014 is when all of those distilleries came back out came out as single malt. So it's 4 what they bought them out under. The last Great Malts, I think, was their PR campaign. So 4 distilleries coming on: Craigellachie, Altmore, Royal Brackler, and what's the other one? Some good Macduff. Yeah, Macduff. Yeah. I do. Oh, what do they call it? Devron.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We had a
I was
great
really
little
fortunate.
20-year-old Altmore out here as well.
Oh yeah. The Altmores that we've had have been bloody delicious. From the young uns to the old uns. So that 28 is really something else. Yeah.
I'm just going to jump us out for a second. I'll be back.
No problems.
If this dies, it's my fault.
What was happening then was that Scotty actually just wanted to touch his face, and everyone's really self-conscious about touching their face right now, especially when you've got a live stream camera in front of you with 20 strangers that you can't see their reaction coming in.
I did actually put my own hand sanitizer.
Still touching his face.
Yeah.
I've got my isopropyl alcohol ready to go. So we are taking this very seriously.
Every tasting note will be, get notes of disinfectant and soap. Got a bit of eucalyptus oil in my hand sanitizer.
Yeah, Joe, can you pass me the bricks? Bit of local product placement.
I might use your bricks as well. So
the local drop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We when you start caring about a hand sanitizer's terroir.
Yeah.
Has it got an age statement?
This is actually just up the road. It's only, half a kilometre?
Yeah, I walked up to get it. Had the town to myself.
Was that class as your daily exercise?
Yeah. Don't know when drinking in the park.
As long as you didn't have a kebab, mate, you'll be okay.
Yeah.
See, the health minister in New Zealand got stood down for taking his family to the beach.
Oh, mate, no, that was his second strike. The first one was when he drove like 20 clicks to take his mountain bike out, and he got busted for that. And then didn't make any appearances. And what had happened was they'd found out that he'd taken his family to the beach on the weekend.
Shocker.
No, they were doing so well.
Yeah, I know.
Alrighty, look, I'm just playing a little bit around with things here, getting them getting things pushing to various places. But I think, being 6:30, we should start proceedings here. We're recording anyway, so I can always upload that a little bit later.
Yeah, sounds good.
How good's this? This is a bit of fun. G'day to everyone, all the attendees who are pulling through into the tasting here. There are a number of questions and things coming through, so I'm just going to roughly lay out how this is all going to go tonight. So first and foremost, thank you for taking a punt on a bit of a different idea here. It was something that we'd sort of been toying around with at the Oak Barrel. You might have seen Scotty and Joey talk rubbish on a Monday night some weeks. But when obviously this all happened a few weeks ago, we thought, okay, we've got to come up with a better idea to host these tastings that we've been planning. So, first of all, a big thank you to the guys at Boutique and Proof & Co. To reacting to some quite hastily panicked phone calls asking how many 50ml bottles there are in the country and where they are, and can we get them into the one spot. So you're flying a little bit by the seat of our pants, sending things out to everyone. We have had a little bit of an issue with stuff getting into Victoria, I think, with social isolating practices in warehouses. Going through the two big warehouses in New South Wales and Victoria has slowed things down a bit. So if you are here on the Victorian ones, feel free to drink along with anything you've got at home. We'll either do this again, or you can watch it back and we can answer more questions. We'll figure that out when we know.
See if the tasting notes still work. You never know.
Yeah, exactly. So it's normally at this point of the tasting that I point out the where the toilets are and where the water is and that sort of thing. But I don't know where the toilets are and the water is at all your places. So I'm going to leave that one up to you guys. As we go through tonight, there is a live chat that you can sort of have a talk to us in. There's also a button on your screen down the bottom that says ask a question. That'll pop up in our Q&A box here as well. So I'm just getting a few messages from people here at the moment saying, just trying to log on. So I will jump onto that, but I want to introduce Simon McGoram to my right, your left, who is the Boutique Whisky Ambassador or Boutique Whisky Company Ambassador for Asia Pacific, who we've dragged along to the Oak Barrel once again for another tasting, who also has a special guest to introduce.
Yes, no, very pleased.
Very
pleased to say that we've managed to wrangle Dave Worthington, who's our global boutique whiskey ambassador, along to help us host this evening. So one of the advantages of doing a virtual tasting is that we can actually have him in Australia for the first time doing a whiskey tasting. So very honoured to have Dave Worthington with us tonight. He is formerly the Global Brand Ambassador of the Year at the Icons of Whiskey Awards. So we are in very good company. And he knows more about whiskey than I've forgotten about whiskey. So great to great to have him along here tonight. So Dave, thank you so much for giving us some time.
Good morning, Joel. Yeah, it's I'm in deepest mid Bedfordshire, in just north of London. It's 9:30 in the morning. I've just finished my first pot of coffee, And now I've got 5 whiskies in front of me. So no, I'm really happy to be here because usually I live out on the road, as you know. So being stuck at home for the last 3 weeks is driving me crazy. So any excuse. I just say, as you know, Simon, I say yes to everything.
Yeah.
Dave, can you do this? Yeah, of course I can. Anytime, anywhere. Where do you want me tomorrow? But yeah, unfortunately, everything's been cancelled over here. So these are the norm. So thanks for having me along.
Thank you.
Welcome to the Oak Barrel.
Yeah.
Dave, we spoke to you yesterday talking about an order. Did you want to go straight into whiskey, or do you want to talk a little bit about boutique? I have, for everyone playing at home, there's obviously the screens. Or should we talk about Dub as well? Because I can probably see him.
Oh, yeah. There's
a strange man just watching in the corner that no one's spoken about yet. Dub is from Proof & Co, the importers here, who has been very, very helpful in making this happen and breaking through barriers we weren't expecting and all that sort of fun thing. But yeah, so up in the top right-hand corner, if you haven't used Zoom before, there's a couple of buttons there that can actually change how you see us all here, whether it's all in a bit of a tessellation pattern or you can have the speaker talking. There's also a bit of a slideshow as well that I will control. And Dave, just tell me when you want me to move slides across, because I have the power to do that. But yeah, I mean, do you want to talk a little bit about boutique and what it is and why you've got the best labels in whiskey?
Yeah, well, I mean, we can run through the presentation here and then I can go on. A number of people wanted to know the order. I've seen a couple of questions asking for the order we're going to run in today. So they can get their bottles and glasses ready. I think that might be a cool idea. So we're going to start this evening with the BenRiach.
It looks so small.
Then we're going to move on to the Inchgower. So it's going to be BenRiach, Inchgower, blended malt number 3. And then we'll do the Springbank and we'll finish off over in Islay. So that boutique whiskey company, an independent bottler founded in 2012. So we will be 8 years old this September. And yeah, we are passionate about whiskey, and we're not, everybody says that, and nearly all independent bottlers will be passionate about whiskey. But there was a phase in history, a little period in history when whiskey was really cheap, and there was a lot of independent bottlers that weren't so passionate about whiskey. And so there was a time when independent bottlers didn't have such a great name in the whiskey industry. That was when people like William Grant and Sons and Diageo really stopped selling whiskey to anybody else, and the doors closed for independent bottlers. But that's all starting to come back. We've now got those relationships with the distilleries, so we can source whiskey from a lot of the distilleries directly themselves. But when we first started off, we released 4 releases right back in September. And we started off with Macallan, Highland Park, not Highland Park, it was a Macallan, Capadonic, Port Ellen. What was the other one? I can't remember the 4th one at the moment. It's such a long time ago. But we started off with some big names. We've gone on and we've had over 150 labels now. So if we just move slides on that one. Can I click? I can't click through the slides, can I? So what makes us unique? We're about liquid quality and not quantity. We bottle rarely seen before bottlings from closed distilleries, from a lot of those distilleries in Scotland that don't have their own brand. There are 95, I keep going on about the 95 established single malt distilleries in Scotland. There are a lot more than that nowadays because they've opened since 2005. But I talk about the 95 established single malt distilleries. So everything before Kilhome in 2005. I know Daffmill came along in 2005 as well, but they never spoke about whiskey for a good 3 years. No longer than that. And so I didn't count them until the new distilleries. And out of that 95, there are still around 20 that you very rarely see bottled as a single malt. We've got one of them on the cards tonight, an Inchgower. You very rarely see Inchgower bottled as a single malt. And some of my favourite distilleries are those distilleries that come from, that mainly produce malt for the blends. We have more awards than Speyside has distilleries. Now, as an independent bottler, because we have no real continuous liquid, apart from very recently with our World Whisky Blend, awards are important to us. They are important to us in the fact that people are recognising that what we're bottling is great stuff. It's, most of the time these awards have been awarded and the whiskey had run out because most of our batches have been very, very small. It's not just Scotch whisky, although that has been the majority of our focus. We're big Scotch whisky fans at Boutique Whisky, but we find and bottle whisky from all around the world. And you will have noticed, I hope, on those little minis that our labels are a little different. Every bottle label tells a story about the liquid, about the distillery, sometimes about a personality on the label. And there's a few of them that tell no story at all. It's just something that we had nothing there's a few of them we have nothing interesting to say about the distillery, about its history or anything like that. And so we put some pretty irrelevant things onto the labels. Certainly our Altmore, when we first released that Altmore was a distillery that had no real history. It's only when it came out in 2014 that the PR team made all these lovely stories about foggy moss, and so we just put this shark and dinosaur going toe to fin on an out of control oil tanker. So yeah, all our labels tell a story, and there's over 150 to date. So if we flick forward, we have on the slide over 150 labels. So out of those 95 established single malt distilleries, 77 now. There's a handful, or more than a handful, to get through. I don't think we will get some of them. It would be really quite difficult to get a few of those distilleries. I've been trying to get BenRiach because I love BenRiach. It's one of those distilleries that you don't see a great deal of. They've been bought by Gordon MacPhail, and my daughter happens to work for them now, and I still haven't got an inroad there, but I'm still working on it. But it's not just single malt distilleries. We've bottled 6 of the 7 grain distilleries. There are 6 operating grain distilleries in Scotland. One of them is Loch Lomond distillery, is a multi-purpose distillery. It does grain and malt whiskey. It's unique in Scotland. But out of those, we call them 7 Scottish grain distilleries. There's just one that we haven't bottled so far, which is the Starlaw distillery. That is a fairly new distillery, but we bottled whiskey from all around the world. Our most recent New World whiskey now has just released just before Christmas. It was from Israel. So we bottled a 1-year-old from the Milk and Honey distillery. But before that, it was South African. We bottled some Three Ships whiskey. I think we were the first independent bottler to bottle some Three Ships whiskey, because they make some cracking whiskey in South Africa, but they don't let any of it leave the country apart from their grain, which is also very good. But we bottled one New Zealand whiskey that was from the old Willowbank distillery. We've bottled some Overeem. We've had 2 little batches of Overeem from Australia, but India, Japan, lots of European distilleries, England and Ireland, and of course quite a few American whiskies, bourbons, rye whiskies, corn whiskies. And we just released an American whiskey, which is sort of a unique category in America. That most American whiskey with that category is normally industrial grade alcohol, but this one is not. This is a really cool Heaven Hill American whiskey. So I mentioned awards. Yeah, a lot of award winners. What have we got here? I think our blend number 3 that's coming in on number 3 is an award winner. I'm pretty certain that one was, and certainly the one at the end, the Islay 25. We don't put all of our whiskies up for awards because some of these batches are very, very small, and like I say, they disappear pretty quickly. But I say those awards that we have every year are important for us really for letting the rest of the world know that we know what we're doing. I'm trying not to swear here. So lots of people say great things about us. So there's a few things from the whiskey geeks, the malt curious, and even the established connoisseurs. We do know what we're doing, and these awards have really put that on our, I mean, the biggest one we got really was the world's best blended Scotch whiskey in 2015. That really put us on the map as an independent bottler when we were up against everybody else in the world in the World Whiskies Awards. So that was really what opened a lot more doors to us. Up until then, we were asking distilleries if they wanted to do something with us. Nowadays, people are coming to us realizing that we can put their whiskey in markets that they don't have. So that South African whiskey that we bottled, nobody knows much about South African single malt, but we had that when I went over to South Africa last year to do a show over there. I think we'd put that in nine or 10 global markets at that time, and they were blown away that their single malt was that far out. I mentioned our labels on the next slide. So single malts from Scotland and beyond, every label tells a story. If you want to move across one, Scott. I've got a few of the labels there, some of my favourites. So the Ardbeg, that is, we've got people on the labels there. We're running right quickly through them. Lots of different ones here. I know you want to get some whiskey in your glass, do you? Some of the Geert Bureau, we've got the Bamore story. We've got the Dalmore story about the mine factory next to the... Every label, there is a wee story that goes alongside it. You want to get a whiskey in your glass, let's go straight on to the first one so we can get drinking then. Because I've got one.
Good shout.
Yeah.
Otherwise it could go on and drone on and on and on.
So just for everyone playing at home, at a standard oak barrel tasting, we pour 15ml pours. Obviously, these are 50ml bottles. So 15ml pours are what we advise for these tastings. Unfortunately, I can't reach into your lounge rooms and control that, but that is what we would normally do.
So a bit of background on the 50ml bottles. These were originally coined for our high-end hotel customers, but in the environment that we're operating in, and Scotty and I were working on how we can bring the oak barrel into your living room, we quickly ripped these out and sent them out. So yeah, share with your friends and family, but yeah, no RSA in your own lounge room, really.
Dub was actually running around all the hotels in Australia, running into mini bars and just ripping them out from people in isolation.
I had to get there before the quarantine got in there.
Yeah.
Right, so what do we got?
Well, the first whiskey is a BenRiach. It's a 9-year-old. It's our 4th batch. A release of, when we bottled it, 2,501 bottles. So definitely not a single cask. We never say single cask and we never say cask strength. Some of them are, some of them aren't. This one obviously isn't, because the biggest cask I think you can put whiskey in is around 600 litres. And 51.7 for a 9-year-old definitely ain't cask strength. So what we want is the best whiskey in the bottle possible. So that's, when we first came out as an independent bottler, we never even put an age statement on because the age statement is limiting. So if we bought some 25-year-old BenRiach and then we added some 12-year-old to it, it would become a 12-year-old. I think Compass Box did that with their 3-year-old, didn't they? They had some very old, that is the rules in Scotch. So we never put the age statements on it because it is a limiting factor, and people think young whiskey is no good, but young whiskey is very, very good. It can be. So this is a 9-year-old. It's a release of 2,501 bottles at 51.7. So we've cut this down between 1% and 4%. We generally cut whiskey down, and that's all done on flavour, as we want to be able to drink this straight out of the bottle, basically. Well, not literally out of the bottle, but we want it to be ready to drink as soon as you pour it, rather than having to sit there and, is it the right strength? We want it to be perfectly balanced, is what we try and do. BenRiach is an interesting distillery, mothballed for 65 years. It was founded in the whisky boom of the 1890s, and the first spirit ran back in 1898. And then there was the big Patterson crash, which is, if you hadn't know anything about Scotch whisky history, was a big smoke and mirrors story with the Patterson brothers bigging up whisky much more than it was, taking out big loans, and there's a big financial crash. And a lot of the distilleries went into a lot of people fell over in that time. There's a lot of distilleries closed between the 1900 and just after the First World War. I mean, that didn't help. So it closed in 1900 and actually remained silent for 65 years. So it really was a new distillery in 1965 because that distillery became a maltings for its sister distillery. I think it's next to Longbourn, and it became the maltings for Longbourn and a number of other distilleries. So it was still an important role to play during those 65 years. It wasn't just a dying distillery. It did become a maltings. The distillery closed again in 1999 and silent once again, and then sold in 2004 when it started up production under Billy Walker's stewardship. I think Billy Walker's retired more times than most people, and he's went out of retirement again and recently turning around the Glen distillery. So if you watched anything that Billy Walker has been involved with, he seems to add capital letters. BenRiach became BenRiach with a capital R. Glen has now got a capital A in the middle of it that it never did. So most BenRiach was never seen as a single malt. Nearly all of it went into blended Scotch whisky in the olden days. That all changed when Billy Walker took over it. And so today it's now owned by Brown-Forman and still produces both unpeated and peated. We have some peated. I think batch 5 is a 6 or 7 year old, and that's some peated spirit. You don't see an awful lot about that. And it also has recently triple distilled some spirit, which is something that you don't often see in Scotch whiskies. A few distilleries have been trying it out recently. It's only Auchentoshan that triple distills 100% of everything. So our label, all of our labels are drawn by one artist, or realised one artist. Emily Chappell is her name. She's a young lady artist, a freelance illustrator. We actually met her accidentally on a booze cruise on Loch Lomond. So our marketing director at the time met Emily on this booze cruise and started talking about the company that we were looking to bring together, and we were looking for an artist, and she said, well, I can do that. Give us a go. And she's been with us ever since. So our label plays a bit of homage to that the distillery was a maltings for longer than it's been a distillery. And monkey shoulder is a condition that the maltsters would get. There was this hunch because they were constantly, I don't know if anyone's been to a maltings and shoveling malt over the shoulder. It's a back-breaking job. And a lot of these guys would end up with a hunch because they're just throwing the shovel over one shoulder. And it's one of our shockingly bad puns, and most of our labels have these shockingly bad puns. I've got tasting notes.
So just a comment on maltings there. I can definitely speak from experience for that. It was about 10 years ago. I was at Lefroy, which do a little bit of their own maltings, and you get a go. You have a bit of a play with it. And I had a few tours already that day, so I actually fell over in the maltings house at Lefroy. So it's about 10 years ago from this year or next year. So next time you have a Lefroy 10, want to think about malting, think of me, because I was swimming in that malt.
Might have a little bit of Scotty in it.
Great. And you're still trying to pull out barley out of your jacket.
Yeah, pretty much.
Did you do the classic Malt Angel?
Yeah, it was about that time. I think someone who was running the tour was like, Scott, please get out of the malt. There are other people on this tour.
So these are the tasting notes. I'm not a big fan of tasting notes because tasting notes are a point in time where you've tasted the whiskey, and you can come back to it another time and there may be one or two things that you'll pick out, or more, or completely different, because it will change on what you've eaten that day. I've just had toast and coffee. And so my palate's going to be quite different to what I had if I'm doing it in the evening at the end. I mean, to me, when I tasted this, it was really quite biscuity, bready, because I make my own bread at home, and a little bit of rye bread is what I was getting when I tasted this yesterday for breakfast. But it is a lovely, what I call a lovely breakfast whiskey. It's very, very sweet on the palate when I first tasted it, which is where I guess that Sauternes note is coming from. I didn't notice any light peat. I don't know if I wrote these notes at the time. There's a few of us that write notes. Like I say, there's just a point in time. The next time you come back, you'll find different things. That's the beauty of whiskey. It's really more evocative of memories, which is why when I tasted this yesterday morning after talking to you guys, I was just reminded of the bread. I thought, wow, this is a really biscuity, bready sort of whiskey. I really liked it.
I think it's like a really good soy and linseed note. It's definitely this linseed sort of character coming through.
I think it's a perfect palate warmer upper.
Yeah.
We've done a fair few BenRiach tastings here over the years, whether they be official, BenRiach bottlings and like a lot of indies. But it's some of the stuff that just resonates so well with people. And what I love, like what you were saying, David, sort of the distillery with more lives than a cat, getting shut down and reopened and shut down and reopened and all that sort of thing. But BenRiach, even in 2020, when you open a bottle of BenRiach and you don't see any specs or casks on it, you have no idea what you're going to get. And I love that so many distilleries come with assumed baggage. Lefroy, you know what you're going to get with a Lefroy. The stablemate Glendronach, you sort of know what you're going to get with that. And you just look at the single cask series, and there's Marsala and Madeira casks and peated Oloroso and unpeated Oloroso and South African red wine barrels. And I think in a market and in the whiskey industry that has grown so big in the past, sort of 2 decades and so quickly, and of tastes from 20 years ago are quite hard to replicate because the conditions aren't the same. Having a distillery go in and be like, look, we're just going to make whatever the hell we can, whether it's, triple distilled or peated or whatever. I think it's really exciting for, as a whiskey drinker, because they can do whatever they want next.
Well, this is also the great advantage of being an independent bottler. We make a point of not saying what cask type it is. We don't really want that to influence how you're going to perceive the whiskey. And it's just fun exploring and finding out. And there's so many good whiskeys from refill casks. I think we often get obsessed about the cask provenance, and it's not always for the best.
The people, whiskey geeks, and I was very much like that a little while ago. I mean, I started getting into whiskey really as a blogger. This is not my career, and this is my career now, but it wasn't ever anything I thought about. Whiskey was my hobby, my passion. I'm originally a shipbuilder, yacht builder. But yeah, I got into that. What cask is it in? Well, what am I going to do with that information once I know? I mean, really, do I like the whiskey or don't I? And then I was always being asked whenever I'm traveling and what cask it's in. I'm thinking, do you understand how many casks? Because I didn't realize how many casks I used every year in Scotch whiskey. So as an engineer, I sat and created a spreadsheet with every distillery, with every capacity from the previous year, in millions of litres of pure alcohol, and worked out how many casks of an 80. So I did an 80-20 split of hoggies and sherry butts, which is very generous on the sherry butts if you know how much a sherry butt costs compared to a hoggy. It's 10 times the difference. And I calculated that the Scotch whisky industry at the current production rates need 5 million casks a year. So yeah, everyone talks about going in the finest oak. Yeah, okay, believe me.
Yeah.
Well, chuck it into anything. And, because every tree is different. I've had 2 springers that were distilled on the same day, that were casked on the same day, 2 different casks, 2 different, they were butts. They were 2 butts, refill butts, and they were very, very different whiskies when they were bottled 19 years later. Very, very different. You could taste the distillery character, but because of the wood, every tree grows at a different rate. So Yeah, it is potluck. But what we do at Boutique Whisky is we're good at finding those casks. Scotch whisky is unique in that it was founded on the back of blended Scotch whisky, whereas nearly all the other New World distilleries, even though American whisky was growing up exactly the same time as Scotch was, it was all about blended Scotch whisky, because the malt whisky that the Scots were producing back in the very early days was really farm distilleries. They were only working during the winter months, and people would be drinking them during the summer. They'd be working in the farms, and then they'd be making the whisky. It was only when it started getting commercialized in the 1860s, when the first blends came out, the whole of the Scotch whisky industry grew on the back of blends. And even today, 90% of the world's Scotch whisky is blended Scotch whisky. I think that's slowly creeping. I think the year before I worked at 89.11, but when I got some books up here from the early 80s, just 1% was single malts back then. 99% was blended Scotch whisky. So it's all about, about the blends. And so Scotch whisky market is where we buy. Lots of people ask us where we buy our cask from. Three sources: the distilleries themselves. Certainly with the New World distilleries, that's easy because they want to talk to us. Some of the independently bottled Scotch whisky or independent distilleries can still talk to us. As you can imagine, most of these big distilleries now are owned by multinationals, so getting to the right people to talk to us hasn't always been easy, but those doors have been opening up. And a lot of our older Scotch comes from private collectors. So the Scotch whisky industry fell on its knees in the late 80s, early 90s. Lots of distilleries were closing. Lots of distilleries had cash flow problems, and so they were selling casks to investors. So that's where most of our old Springbank came from that period when Springbank had to close. I think that was late 80s to the mid 90s. Springbank was closing, and then they needed to sell casks. And the other one is whiskey brokers. So that's where we get most of our Scotch from, whiskey brokers. Nearly all distilleries feed whiskey brokers. That's where all the blending houses go.
And Dave, I know we're going to talk a little bit about Springbank when we get onto that, but there was a time in Australia when if you bought a bottle of Springbank, it would come with a slip inside it, which was basically like an order form. It's like, do you want to buy a barrel? Tick your boxes, what type and what size and that sort of thing, and you could buy it. And wow. I know from like now current experience, I can take various members of J.A. Mitchell Springbank Distillery out and buy them lots and lots of drinks and do very nice things, and they'll still laugh in my face when I say, can I please buy a cask of whiskey? So just how the world has changed. But yeah, I don't know if it was elsewhere, but in Australia, it was order forms in your bottles. It's like,
how long ago was that?
Oh, we're going back a little while now, probably 15, 20 years. So about that time of, closure and that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, different. Yeah. People think like 3 weeks ago was a different world. Try when Springbank was selling casks.
It was a different world 3 weeks ago, wasn't it? Very different.
Should we try another?
So any questions on BenRiach to come through? Anything there?
Not that I can see. And guys, feel free to throw tasting notes or anything at us throughout the night, throughout the tasting. We also. I did see some setups of people were posting on the internet before we went live. If you get any good setups at home, I don't know if you can send photos, but send it to the Oak Barrel Facebook page and we can share them around as well, because I think there's going to be some pretty cool setups from people at home.
Yeah.
Are you guys ready for whiskey number 2?
I reckon.
I thought you'd never ask.
It is only 10 o'clock here.
Yeah. And I know that we did say 15 ml pours, but Simon, there's still half left in that first bottle, so that's about 12 ml pours. So don't be too afraid to go. Yeah.
And team, unlike a tasting at the Oak Barrel, if you've got anything you want to say, you can say it through the Q&A anonymously. So no question is a stupid question.
A very good question that's come through is that, yes, we are moving on to the Inchgower as number 2.
Inchgower is number 2. This is our third batch, a 14-year-old. Inchgower is one of those coastal Speyside distilleries, very rarely seen as a single malt, except through the Flora and Fauna series when it's bottled as a 14-year-old. And the only other place you'll find it really is through independent bottlers like us. Although Diageo did have it in their special releases 2018. They released a 27-year-old. That's the first time they'd released a Inchgower in their special releases series that come out at the end of every year. So they released a 27-year-old. Our batch one was a 26-year-old. And I was able to taste them alongside each other, side by side. And I can tell you that ours won hands down. But then, I'm biased. But no, it is. I mean, our 26-year-old is spanking. But this is spanking as well. I mean, it really is. I'm trying not to swear. So the majority of its matured whiskey goes to the blenders. It all goes to the blenders. It's been a significant player in Bell's in particular. I think it was owned by the Bell's family. As they're all of their own distilleries, this nutty, spicy theme. Today, it plays a significant role within the Johnny Walker range of whiskies.
Dave, one of the first things I get off this nose is something I've seen a lot of Inchgowers is just that nuttiness that comes through, and it's written on the screen there as well. I've never tried Inchgower New Make. Have you ever come across that?
I haven't. The Inchgower distillery was meant to be opening the end of this month at the Spirit Speyside Festival. Is what I was hoping to be able to get into. It's one of those distilleries that isn't open, and I was hoping to be able to get some New Make Spirit. So that's all been cancelled this year. So what makes it? I mean, they do something slightly different there. This spicy character. I mean, these distilleries that are set up. This is one of those 20 distilleries. They're set up to make a particular style of whiskey that suits the blends, and they do cut them and change them from time to time. When one distillery is down, when Clynelish was down, they made a few other distilleries make that waxiness. Diageo are very clever. They've got some very clever scientists up in the head of the distilling there that can go in and change the regime to make a style of whiskey to suit their requirements. So Inchgower all starts by a hotter than usual second water during a very quick mashing regime. This cuts back any overt, really nuttiness. Fermentation is short, and those steeply angled line arms capture those weightier elements. It always comes across quite peppery. When I nose that, it's reminding me of almost like a tequila, a peppery tequila at times. I can get that on my nose.
Has Batiki done tequila?
Her label.
We haven't done tequila, no.
That could be fun.
It could be. There's the rice.
The label. This label had me stumped for a little while because I couldn't. When I first saw it, a goat island. I found one reference. So obviously, whoever gave the brief, my boss who gave the brief for this label, also had the same book, but. Yeah, Inchgower comes from Scots Gaelic for Island of the Goats. And there is a goat island in the middle of Niagara Falls. So it's the inspiration for, it's right in the middle of Inchgower, Niagara Falls. So you've got Bridal Falls on one side, and I can't remember, Horseshoe on the other side. And this is, Horseshoe Falls, Bridal, but it says so there, I could have read that. And you can look across to Canada from Goat Island, which is what we've depicted on our label there with the fields of ice wine. And we've even got a little reference to the Boutique gin there with the fox in the background, and the artist who's sitting behind that easel there is actually the artist for our gin labels. That's where the label. So Goat Island, very very loose association between the two.
Just had a question on the stream here from Esmond. Thank you, Esmond. Now, this is the batch 3 of Inchgower. And when you are, coming up with different batches, do you try and be consistent between, on distillery, saying, Inchgower batch 1, 2, 3? Are there threads, or do you go for different whiskies each time?
Oh, they can be. I mean, the Inchgower label will always be the same, Inchgower. So that label will stay with. So when you ever see that label, you will know it's an Inchgower. There's generally one tiny little change between batches. So if we click, if we're on the tasting notes there, if you click back to, so that's batch 3. If you click back to batch 1, you should be able to see a little change. Now click back to 3, and you see a little bottle over there on the ice wines, little change there.
top left-hand corner.
So that's a little, it's like a Where's Wally, trying to find the changes on each label. Sometimes they're really, really tiny, just like a star has appeared or something like that. The style of whiskey, no, it's just about the distillery. It's about, basically what we're looking for is banging liquid. So whether that is a 3-year-old, a 14-year-old, or a 26-year-old, you know, not everything we buy ends up into a boutique label. So we buy lots of whiskey, but only really the cream of the crop goes into a boutique release. And if we buy something and we think, we buy everything on samples. And if we get it into the lab and then we decide, actually, it's not quite as good as we first thought, it doesn't go into a boutique label. Now, if we get something older or something younger that we blend with it then and think, actually, now it's actually worth putting into a boutique, or we can put it into some of our other blends that we do in Atom brands. So it's only the cream that goes into the boutique labels, what we're finding either through the distilleries or through the brokers. So there isn't any running theme between batches. So batch 1 was a 26-year-old, batch 2 was a 17-year-old, batch 3 was a 14-year-old, and I think batch 4, I think that was another 26 or a 27-year-old. So there's parcels of whiskey that we're finding. Sometimes we're thinking it's a single cask, it's perfect as it is. Sometimes we're thinking, actually, what happens if we put a bucket of that 10-year-old into this 26-year-old? Oh, bloody hell, now it's good. Now it's, you know, why wouldn't we want to do that? As an independent bottler, that's what we want, the best liquid possible in the bottle at the time.
I'm really liking this tasting note of fresh cut grass. And I'd just like to say, I really miss going outside too.
Yeah. They come from Phil Brooks. And that's a bit of an oak barrel classic, the old fresh cut grass. Yeah. Along with a bit of pepper hit on the palate, which, I can see that as well.
I mean, if you look at, I don't know if you can see it, the colour on here is almost like a new make spirit. So that's been in refill casks. 220, I don't think it's a single cask, although it's only 225 bottles. I don't know how much was split off for small batch fractionals. But this is so drinkable. I mean, this is dangerously drinkable. It's just so easy. So easy to drink. I just love. I had this in a tasting up in Edinburgh just before we locked down. I wanted to pick something a little unusual that not many people would have tasted much Inchgower, and it was a favourite of the afternoon.
Inchgower is great for that at tastings. The batch 2, which is a 17-year-old, is just really esoteric. So we've got a bit of that still in Australia and being run around doing a few whiskey shows. We had it at the Oakborough Whiskey Fair, and yeah, it was a fun dram. Yeah.
Just got sent a message from Michelle, who is tuning in tonight with her little setup. I think Brett and Michelle are tasting it together, and they've gone the whole cheese board route. You got the cheese platter. Yeah. I think we need to do that next time.
Where's the cheese?
Why didn't I think of that? Good to see you guys.
The Inchgower with cheese. Oh, absolutely. Yes, I can see that. But a bit early for me to have cheese.
Hard cheese.
On the table.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, something crumbly. And almost with you get that that crystallization run through of them. Sometimes that would.
Yeah, vintage cheddar and Speysides just go together superbly over here.
Awesome. It's very much a me whiskey, that one. I found in the last few years, like when fell head over heels for Islay whiskies, then went through like a really big sherry phase, but just that really, hands off from the cask's point of view, sort of maturation. So you get age, you get all the things that come with development in age without necessarily the cask adding so much. It's actually really interesting to see in not so much whiskey, but other spirits like, Blanco tequilas that have been just sat in stainless for 60 days. So there's nothing being added, but the spirit just calms down. I think this is sort of like the equivalent of that. And I just love the spirit character. I love their very late cuts. And again, it's like a distillery that you just don't get to see that often, particularly in Australia where, not as much makes it across the ocean. So it's stuff like this is just awesome.
It's a classic Diageo minimal intervention. It's works.
Yeah, I mean, this would have been destined as blending stock. Effectively, this is going out to the brokers, and because of the network of contacts that we have and a fabulous buyer, that we get sent cast samples sent to us and said you might be interested in these, and then we can pick through them, and yeah, we can pick out those. It's like picking out needles in giant haystacks. Yeah.
Dave, from what I understand, it's actually quite important to have refill casks. The reason that blenders want refill casks is you're maintaining that distillery character, right?
Yeah, yeah. Otherwise, the wood takes over, and you lose that distillery character. And you know, there's nothing better to me is visiting distilleries and tasting new make spirit. I love tasting new make spirit off the stills, and it's not a problem I have, but it's where you can really start to understand the character. Yeah, too much wood influence. All of a sudden, I'm chewing pencils, you know, and I don't really want to eat pencils. You know, I did that at school.
Are you buying up a lot of hand sanitizer now? That's bigger than you make, isn't it?
I haven't looked at that, I must admit. I mean, you can see, I mean, like your shop there, surrounded by spirits. I am indeed surrounded by spirits. Yeah, there's a whole cabinet behind me, absolutely loaded. There's a couple of boxes below me. And this is just the office whiskey. There's the downstairs whiskey as well. Whiskey number 3.
Yep.
Everyone ready for a move on to whiskey number 3. So here we have a blended malt Scotch whiskey. So there are only 5 categories of Scotch allowed to call Scotch whiskey. So it's either a single malt, a single grain, a blended malt, a blended grain, or a Scotch whiskey. And as soon as people see, because we follow the SWA rules, we can put big blend on here, but you know, if you look on some of our other labels here, so this is our BenRiach, it does say BenRiach down here in tiny little letters here. We follow the SWA rules, so we call it a blended malt whiskey. The name of the distillery has to be smaller than our logo, and our logo is pretty damn small. That boutique whiskey company running across the top there. So the name of the distillery needs to be smaller than that, which it is up there at BenRiach down here. Blended malt. Not all whiskies are blended malts, if you know what I mean. We have to call this a blended malt. It's more or less a single malt. It's called a teaspooned malt in the trade, and it will have a name. I've seen casks of these teaspooned malts in the warehouses. This is a 21-year-old, a release of just 1,323 bottles. We bottled this at 47.1% ABV. And teaspooning is a term that was started in the 80s by William Grant and Sons, really to protect their brand from these armchair independent bottlers. So you very, very rarely, there may be a few still around, will see an independently bottled Balvenie, Glenfiddich, Kinninvie, and then Glenmorangie followed suit with that. You won't find independently bottled Glenmorangie, although we did manage to get a couple. What they mean by teaspooning their malts is they protect their brand from independent bottlers. What they do is they say they get a cask of Balvenie, Glenfiddich, and they chuck in a mug of another whiskey. Balvenie, Glenfiddich, Glenmorangie are in high demand by blenders. It's more so the Speyside whiskies. If you look at the Blender's Handbook of 1975, all the distilleries were categorized in first class, top class, first class, second class, third class, and all of the top class and first class for all Speyside whiskies. They are the dressing whiskies in demand by the blenders. So even today, there's very few distilleries that nothing goes to the blenders. I think I came across, Oban maybe one, certainly Arcantoshan, they do not have any of their whiskey going into blends now. So the key distilleries that teaspoon today, say William Grant and Sons, Glenmorangie, these trade, they have names. Burnside's a Balvenie, said to have a mug full of Glenfiddich in. Wardhead, which is what we've got here, effectively blend number 3. 21-year-old. It's effectively a Fiddick, but it's teaspooned with Balvenie. Westport is Glenmorangie and Glenmorangie. And Alduni, I think, was something that Kinninvie was given as a malt. So when you go and buy anything from William Grant in the open market, it will have one of those names on the cask. And I've been into warehouses where I've seen casks of Wardhead. Now, today, do they actually put that teaspoon in that cask? Personally, I don't think that would happen. As you know, I've been in business a long time. As I said, I was an engineer most of my life, and most companies are run by accountants. And the very, very thought of getting a product and opening a cask and pouring something else in is just, how much does that cost you to do when you could just barcode it? So you could just barcode it. Oh, that's a blended malt. That's a single malt. So once it has a certificate, you know, everything is traced in Scotland for tax and for labelling. So once it has that bit of paperwork saying it's a blended malt, it's a blended malt forever and ever. You can never bottle that as a single malt. So that's the way it is.
Dave, can I ask you a question there? Just
sure.
on those sort of, you know, code words like Wardhead and that sort of thing, were they sort of brought about by the distilleries and the companies owning those distilleries themselves, or was that just a little bit of like industry secret squirrel insiders that, you know, teaspoon, we're going to call that a Wardhead or something?
I think it was originally brought together by the blenders or the brokers, given them names of what they can be. But I've noticed that most of these names are now owned. The trademark names are now owned by the distilleries who are teaspooning. So we couldn't, you know, we couldn't call this a Wardhead or Burnside without some sort of rights going back to William Grant and Sons. They've actually bought those names. The same with Williamson, I think was a Lefroy name. We had a Williamson once as a nod to Bessie Williamson. And when we went to release another secret Lefroy, we were told that we couldn't use that name because it's now owned by the distillery. So yes, they have been taken on board as industry names now, but I think they were invented at the time to sell casks, because you couldn't call it a Balvenie, you couldn't call it a Glenfiddich. And so they would give them, you know, teaspoon Balvenie, it's a Burnside.
We just had Ross Blaney chime in. Where is he?
Yeah, Ross says Burnside and Moorhead were named after the farms around the distillery, smiley face. Also, this whiskey is banging. And so I don't know what this whiskey is, but Ross Blaney might have some involvement as a brand ambassador for William Grant and Son. So maybe he's finding something he likes in this whiskey because it's something quite familiar. I'm just going to put that out there, and Ross can confirm or deny at his discretion.
I put this out in blind tastings. Well, I'll normally do what I've been doing tastings over here. I've been doing them blind, really, because I like peeling the labels off and making club labels for the different whiskey clubs. It's also to remove those preconceptions, because a lot of people have walked up to me and they've looked at all of these on the line, and this one just says single malt, and this one just says blended malt. And I've had people come up to me and said, "No, I don't drink blends, mate." And I'm saying, you haven't even looked to see what this one is, a 21-year-old or is a 23-year-old teaspooned. Yeah. So yeah, I take the labels off, and it was the only way I was going to get an English whiskey into the Glasgow Whisky Club as well. And I did. And they liked it until I told them what they had. And they still remind me about it every time I see them. I think I was the only ambassador to have got an English whiskey into the Glasgow Whisky Club at the time. I don't know if anyone's followed me since, but I really thought I might be lynched there. But I thought they deserved one, and they loved it. But yeah, I normally peel the labels off, and when I put this in a blind tasting, quite a few people have picked this. You know, Fiddick fans have said, I know what this is. Yeah.
Another question coming in on the Q&A. Thank you, Michelle and Brett. How many samples on average do you go through before you find the right one? Any distilleries have higher hit rates than others?
Because we have a great network of people within the brokers, they're also looking out for us as well, and they will pick a selection to send to us. We're not just going through everything. We just built those connections up over the years. How many samples we go through, I don't know, because I don't spend enough time in the lab. My time is generally out on the road. I know when I go into the office and into the lab, there are just samples everywhere. And normally when I'm walking in, someone's saying, "Oh, Dave, try this at 9 o'clock in the morning." "Oh, bloody hell, this is great. What is it?" "I can't tell you yet, but yeah." So I really don't know how many we go through, to be honest, because most of my time I'm not down in the office or the lab at all.
From my visits,
So we have
I've seen hundreds of samples, so there's a lot.
Yeah. I mean, I have over 200 different releases behind me of various. I mean, these are all boutique releases. Yeah, we must go through an awful lot. We certainly did through a couple of years where we were just having loads. We have a head office down in Kent, which is south of London. That is where the lab is now. But we have a bottling plant in Edinburgh because all Scotch whisky has to be distilled, matured and bottled in Scotland. We can't move it out of cask, in a cask across the border at all. You're not allowed to move Scotch whisky out of Scotland in a cask. So we do all our bottling, even our fractionals, to split a bottle, to go to the drinks by the dram, we have to send the bottle back up to Scotland to be bottled into the minis. So that's where all the whiskey comes into up into Edinburgh, our facilities up there. But the lab where all the samples come down, the cask samples will come down. It will be down into Tonbridge in Kent.
Not bad little juice, this one.
It's very, very good.
Phil Brooks chimes in. Glenfiddich was one of my favourite noses. So was thinking that from the first moment. Harder to pick on the palate though, I think. But yeah, I'd agree with what I consider to be a very Fiddick nose. And when was it, if it turns out to be that, when was the last time you had a 21-year-old, over 43% Fiddick type thing?
Yeah.
It's a bit of value there.
Well, Fiddick have done a few releases that have upped the ABV, and it really shows. Like drinking whiskey is at this strength so much more texture. All right, should we?
Yeah. So I'm just going to reply to a question here. So just with the way that Zoom works, we can control what we see on our screens, but in fact, all the screens that you guys have got there is under your control, so we can't touch that. But yeah, there's a few different things. Up in the top right-hand corner, you can go, there's a button that says swap shared screen with video, and that'll actually put the presentation up to the main screen or to our videos. You can also, if you get sick of our ugly mugs, which I highly recommend, to click on Dave and make sure he gets all the FaceTime, so you don't have to look at myself and Simon. But yeah, it's actually I can't control that from here, unfortunately. But yeah, just the top right hand corner, it's next to the enter full screen mode. Should be a button called swap shared screen with video.
Someone's just asked a question about the label for the blended malt.
Oh yeah, we'll go back.
Our blended malts, we go through some of them. We've got this one we have a teaspoon on it, so we've got a teaspoon rocking out in a rock concert. Our first one was All Hail the Spoon, so that was more like a music festival, like Glastonbury, like the tour, the spoon on top, everyone worshipping the spoon. Here we have the spoon rocking out. We have another teaspoon whiskey, which we have Super Spoon, which I love. Super Spoon, the label on that one.
Yeah.
Because we're not allowed to, if we go back to right at the beginning where we've got blended malts on the presentation, there's a number of labels there. Back on page 14.
Yeah.
No, not 14. It's not 14.
One and out.
14. That one there, yeah, blended malt. So we've got the teaspoon whiskies across the top. So they are teaspooned or just two whiskies with one dominating. So we've got the teaspoon on blended malt number 1 standing up on like a Glastonbury tour. We have a rock concert for blend number 3, Super Spoon there in New York, Times Square, with all of our labels around on the billboards. And then down the bottom here, we're not allowed to put the recipe of our whiskies on the label. No, we did to begin with. If you look down at the bottom here at FWP for the win, there's a little really tiny small print there. There is the recipe of what we put in there. And the same with blend number 1, Islay blended malt Scotch whiskey. The recipe on the blackboard there is very, very tiny, and we got told off for that. We're not allowed to do that. So we've done it in code on the second label down the bottom. There's a pie, and so we've got little pie charts of ratio of what's in it, and you can see the characters from different labels on there. Yeah. There's a dinosaur, there's the crossed feet and the pistols, and the big head for the small stills. So that's the way we've managed to show what we've done on that label there. So every label tells a story. Some of it are a load of old bollocks, but we're not allowed to do that sort of thing.
I think some of my favourite labels are the ones that are actually quite nonsensical. I think, Simon, you touched it at the last physical tasting we did, when if you can't necessarily think up a good theme for the distillery, you'll just throw something cool at the label. I think there was a couple examples of that.
Well, I mean, one of my favourites is the My Lovely Horse label, which I'm wearing on my T-shirt here today. So that's from our Irish single malt. And we can't name the distillery, so we just wanted something that was fun and distinctly Irish. So if you're a Father Ted fan, you might be familiar with this. It's from an episode called A Song for Eurovision. Anyway, once you've jumped off this tasting, jump onto YouTube and look up My Lovely, Lovely Horse, and it'll be 2.5 minutes of your life you'll never get back. You'll wonder what happens.
We've all got time at the moment.
Yeah.
I like the Soup Town's probably my favourite.
Soup Town's pretty cool, yeah.
Yeah.
The other one I really liked, which you won't have heard the story about, is the Glendullan label. We had a brief. We were going to do the Glendullan label very, very similar to the Ardmore label. So we were going to have rather than the cask all explained, we were going to have the mash tun all explained. And we did a lovely rendering, it's just a black and white 3-line sketch of it, and it sent back through, and Ben looks at it and said, "I'm bored of this already. I'll give you 2 words, Space Olympics, have fun."
Yeah.
So Space Olympics came back on that label for no reason. So it took me ages to find out what happened there.
Just got a photo from Marco, who is using of his setup, and he's using the old hand-blown glass pipette. So it's pretty fancy at House Grezza at the moment. And TJM has said that he's using a range of glasses today, using a glass from Lefroy, from Ardbeg, the Irish Whisky Museum, Kilbeggan and Kilhoman. I assume this is okay. Yes, that is completely fine. And I quite like it for an independent bottler, just getting every bit of glassware in the house and putting it together. I quite like that approach.
It's very COVID. There are no rules.
Yeah.
There's nothing better than drinking whiskey from a mug, because A, nobody knows what you're drinking, and B, nobody knows how much you poured, including yourself. My excuse.
When working for a larger company, I used to use bottles like this as my water bottle in the office, because no one knew at what point in the day I actually crossed over and just started drinking.
Recycling at its best.
Yeah, that's another good plus point about New Make Spirit, because it often looks like water.
Yeah.
I think just before we go on to the next one, I just want to say that this is going to be a very special dram. And when we were throwing back the ideas of what was available in the country, and Dub sent me through a list, basically the next whiskey was the one I said, yes, this is it. And now how the hell do we get 4 others and keep it under $100? So this is, for me, this is going to be the hero tonight, this one.
I'm very excited about the next 2.
If you guys have ever seen the Fire Festival documentary, and there's a guy that gets the bottles of water, I'm not saying that's how Scotty kept out under $100, but
So, Springbank. Every time I look at Springbank, I always think every drop of this is precious because they make so little. Every drop of Springbank is handmade. It's the only distillery that does everything by hand. I think they're the largest employer in the area in Campbelltown. They don't need to have that many people working at a distillery. You can automate most things at a distillery these days, but they don't. You don't have to floor malt everything, but they do. And when I looked at although their capacity is big, they make 10% of what Ardbeg make, for example. So it's our 17th batch. There was just 15 real bottles of this available when I looked for it. So much of this went into fractionals. 50.2% ABV. This looks like it was a sherry hoggy. Springbank, one of 3 surviving distilleries in the once thriving Campbelltown region that had more than 25 distilleries in the late 1800s. Used to be called the Whisky Town. Really because of its proximity, it was a coastal route. Islay, Springbank, coastal routes before the railways is when they were their heyday. The whiskey was shipped rather than trucked around on backs of train tracks. When the railways hit Speyside, Speyside started taking over because the grain was there, the fields were there, the farms were there, and the direct access to the cities became easier to make whiskey up in Speyside. And this is the first time I've tasted this as well. This is a sample that I knew was going to export, so I didn't actually jump into it. It's only fortunate that I had a sample under the counter here.
So yeah, the switchboard has lit up, as they say. We've got a few comments on this, and I'm glad you swore first, Matt Fowler, because I can blame it on someone else, and it's all downhill from here. Well, shit, that Springbank is a different beast. That Springbank funk. Cam Fold, that's not a particularly Springbank nose, very different. Jay says, what a ripper. Classic farmy, oily wool and lanolin notes on the nose. Ross Blaney, holy crap, that smells incredible. TJM appraised pretty good as well. I think TJM's doing this pretty well. He's got all the glassware out and he's getting into it. We like to see. Can't quite see your name there, but fills the whole room with a lovely smell. That's what we like to see. And yeah, Phil Brooks is digging it. But I'm a bit of a sucker for Springbank and all things Campbelltown, I must admit. Big fan of everything they do. And yeah. I mean,
it is quite oily, isn't it?
Yeah.
So oily.
I found these sort of Springbanks go really well with some sort of chocolate and chocolate puddings. It is really much like a dessert whiskey, this one.
Yeah, it reminds me, like if people are familiar with the core range, sort of like pushing towards that 15, which has that higher element of sherry cask in it.
Yeah.
Very, very late night sort of whiskey, People always think of like front of the fireplace, leather armchair, go for something smoky. But that's when I'm reaching for Springbank 15 personally. Smells like a cooked sausage in a cup of Lapsang Souchong.
That's great.
I'm going to write that down.
Yeah. I think Ross Blaney's pushing to get his face on the label at some point. Inspired by his son, who was also under 300 kilometres away. And that's actually one of the great things. We've got people from all over the country here today, from Tasmania, from WA. Probably just not Victoria because of the delivery issues there, but we'll fix that. But yeah, really cool that father and son having a shared whiskey tasting 300 kilometres away from each other.
That's awesome.
And probably even further away from us. And definitely further away from you, Dave.
Dave, do you want to tell us about this label? What's going on?
Well, yeah, everything by hand is what the Springbank, everything manually from floor malting to filling the cask, lot more manual labour involved in this distillery anywhere else in Scotland. I say they were the first distillery in Scotland to pay the living wage in Scotland as well. I mean, it is a family distillery. I think they make whiskey really for the love of it rather than for money, which is why I always think of Springbank as, whenever you see Springbank in the shop, it just disappears very, very quickly. When there's a new batch in, I used to work with a few local retailers. And yeah, as soon as the Springbank came in, it was gone instantly. I love the 10 and the 15-year-old. It's great whiskey. So we've taken this manual labour to the next level. We've got 2 spirits writers. I think they're more drinks writers, and you see them quite often on the telly box on a Sunday morning called Sunday Brunch, talking about drinks. But they did start off in whiskey. Actually, they did start off in music. I think they were both A&R men in the music industry. But they turned
they worked for, right? I'm pretty sure
they turned their passion towards spirits. Whiskey initially, they bottled their own casks under different labels, and now they're drinks writers, gin, Armagnac, and everything. But we've just taken them running. So there's Neil Ridley on the bicycle there, and Joel Harrison opposite, operating Springbank's old Porteous Mill there. And if you go through all of the labels, lots of things changing. Their bow ties change, or their pocket squares change. You can only see 2 here, but little things change. There's the flags changing colour, the back there. There's a little hamster in the wheel moving around. But yeah, it's really about a play. They're well known in the spirits industry over here for sure. They've written a number of different books on gin and whiskey and spirits, and so they feature on our label.
Yeah, I as a music industry refugee myself, I remember about 10 years ago they were quite prominent with a blog called carstrength.net, and I know that a lot of us have all got a little bit of time on our hands at the moment. But to do things, if you're looking for books to read across whiskey and gin, I highly recommend anything Neil and Joel have written, because for me they were my go-to blog, and certainly in a time before the now unfortunately gone scotchwhiskey.net, when Dave Broom wasn't doing as much online as he is now, they were my go-to. So yeah, I highly recommend anyone because they make, like, whiskey writing, I feel something can be quite dry.
Yeah.
And they applied whiskies to real world situations and made it, it feel like this is not just a bottle of liquid that's come out of a factory. This means something to people. So very, very good, writers, particularly if you've read all your How to Learn Latin and, Accounting 101 books, and it's something a bit more interesting, go look up a Joel and Neil book.
If you're not a fan of reading, actually, one thing we should point out is you have a podcast now, Dave. We haven't talked about that yet.
We do have a podcast. Yeah, we have the Uncorked Whiskey Sessions podcast that you can find online, Spotify, Amazon, iTunes. That Sam and I, our head of whiskey, Sam Simmons, Dr. Whisky, ex-Balvenie Global Brand Ambassador, talk a little bit of geekiness, but a lot of silliness. It's just a monthly podcast. We are, at the moment, during this lockdown, on Instagram Live every day at 2:00 in the afternoon, where we do a little bit of nonsense.
4 a.m.
I advise you.
It's something like that.
But it stays up on our Instagram page for 24 hours. I'd advise you not to watch it today, because I might be a bit silly after this.
So I'll definitely tune in for that one, man.
Yeah.
I might just stay here and go through it.
We've got a very loose theme at the moment, that we're wearing different hats every day. That's the only loose thing that we have. yesterday Sam couldn't make it, so I did call up Ian Allen from Glen Distillery and put him on the spot for just 15, 20 minutes at lunchtime. We call it afternoon tea. We start off with tea, and then we might pour something else into our teapot to pour into our mug afterwards. But we play silly games, so yeah, we've got some silly games lined up. We had silly games for Ian yesterday. You can still see it now up until around 2:00, where the new video will go on. And we're recording a new episode of the podcast this week, so it'll be the first time we're doing an episode remotely. where we'll have people in 4 different rooms trying to record it. And we're going to have a go at that this afternoon, see if it works.
Cool.
Because normally we sit in the lab.
Just having a couple of questions come in regarding potential pricing and purchases, and I posted a link there in the chat for basically a virtual price list. Some of these whiskies we have available, some of them we don't, because they've sold out in the 500 mils. We've only got the 50 mils left. So what we've done is I've looked at the Sydney warehouse, what we've got, all that pricing is there. There is actually a little bit more that Dub has flicked through to me today from some of the other warehouses around the country, maybe sitting in Bond. So what I might do is I will put in tomorrow morning, I might email around again to everyone a further price list, just with some pretty sharp pricing.
I mean,
and some of the ones we're going through at the moment, we definitely don't have in 500 mil, but we do have stock in everything we're tasting today in 50 mil. So if you're interested in just getting your hands on something extra, or if you want to send your mate an ISO a gift across the country, like it's all available in 50 mil. But yeah, it's a bit of a dog's breakfast for a tasting and under ISO.
Yeah. And before you all ask, the Springbank.
No, there was only 15 500 ml bottles released.
Yeah, a long time ago.
Yeah.
Back when I could drink in bars. I'm pretty sure we knocked a fair dint in one in Hobart, and so I think they've all been opened. And so you've all been very responsible and only drunk 15 mils of that tonight. So you have a few mils of that left to go, about 35 to have for that one. But yeah, something like this is very special. So savor it. And this is the first time I can say you can leave the Oak Barrel tasting room and come back tomorrow and have a little bit more.
That's it. What a cracker.
Yeah, I could spend some time with
this gets better as you leave it, I think.
What's the ABV? Yeah, so 50.2.
50.2, yeah.
It's going down so easy at that strength, though.
Yeah.
Oh.
That's what we want.
Yeah.
That's what we, as an independent bottle, that's what we want out of every bottle. We want it to be balanced perfectly for drinking straight out of the bottle, which is why we do cut these down. But generally, I do add water when I'm writing tasting notes. When I'm drinking, I very rarely find I need to add water to any of these. I just find that they're perfectly balanced. And this one, I must admit, the Springer's going down much better than I was expecting it to do, because it looked, I mean, you look at the colour of that, it just looks, I think I'm going to be chewing pencils here, but no, it's not. It's very, very good. It's very fruity.
We think a sherry cask there.
Yeah, it's a sherry hoggy, is what I can, as far as I can tell. Yeah. We often asked about this cask, and quite frankly, sometimes we really don't know what cask. We can look at the cask and say it's a hoggy. We can say it's a barrel, and we can say it's a butt or a punch, and you can look at shapes, but how many times it's not always registered in fillings, basically, because a lot of this wouldn't have been a filling. This would have been a privately owned cask, but certainly the Inchgower and possibly even the BenRiach would have been known in the industry as fillings, stuff that's going off to the blending trade. Gorgeous stuff.
A good question here from Esmond. Do you split casks with other indies?
I certainly think we did at the beginning. When we were first starting off, I know that some of our batches were very, very small, and I think we were splitting it with other independent bottlers. So someone would have half of it, because it's, buying casks of whiskey and selling them as an independent bottler is a very expensive business. And as the company when we first started was a small independently owned company, cash is king. And everything that we made from selling the last batches, we piled back into the company. So we did grow organically. Things changed a year and a half ago when we were bought out by an investment arm of AB InBev, which allowed us to grow a little bit faster and put in all those, we put in although we had the steps into putting our own bottling plant in, we'd already started, but allowed us to grow a bit further, putting marrying tons in for some of the other stuff that we've been doing at Atom Brands. So that's allowed us to grow a little bit faster than we were growing up until then organically. But yeah, up until then we were just growing organically, selling a cask, buying a new one, reinvesting into that to finding more.
We still put a lot of money into buying casks. So we're actually lucky enough to have Felix Steer, one of our cask buyers, out in Australia just last year. And so he did a trip around a few amazing Australian distilleries, and dare say he went back home with a few casks, not in his carry-on, but being sent on after him.
Yeah, I think he might have come to session 2 of the Whisky Fair.
He did a couple.
Yeah, and as he came in, I actually tagged his jacket so I could just track him via GPS to see which Australian tables he was going to, so I could go up afterwards.
So it's going to be interesting to see when those eventually get released, hopefully as all boutique bottlings. How many will make it back down to Australia? So
yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's probably a good point to throw in. I mean, I've been at the Oak Barrel for 5 years now, and we've done many, many different tastings. But even 5 years ago, the whiskey industry here was very limited. We didn't see, things like Signatory Vintage, huge indies we haven't really seen. And it's only really been in the past sort of 2 years when Proof & Co. have come into Australia in a big way that we've had access to that stuff. So, the Australian, the 2 Australian releases from the one Australian distillery that Boutique done so far never came to Australia. So I think that's quite exciting to have that as a possibility to finally be able to bring that sort of stuff back in.
I mean, even things like Willowbank. Willowbank's been shut for quite some time. And we just released Willowbank late last year. So I don't think there's any of that coming to Australia at the moment. But that should be fun.
Famous old New Zealand distillery for those playing at home. Willowbank.
I'm a Kiwi. Yeah. Had to throw New Zealand in there.
Yeah. Shall we get on to something with a big question mark in front of it?
Yeah.
We can indeed, yes. Okay, whiskey number 5, our final whiskey on this tasting. So sometimes we are not allowed to name the distillery. That comes across through whoever owns the distillery or the label or the brand. Sometimes we're not allowed to know. We have actually bought whiskey where we seriously do not know where it came from. I try not to ask where it comes from because I can't keep secrets very well. So as soon as someone tells me what it is, I'll tell you what it is. I seriously don't know what this is. We have, I say, our Speyside number 2 is a 25-year-old Speyside number 2. Yeah, and I know we don't know what that is at all. We bought that under express conditions that we weren't allowed to name, or the broker wasn't even allowed to name it. This, I have no idea where it comes from, but it's a 25-year-old Islay single malt. The label is a Doge theme. I don't know, it went straight over my head. I have no idea, but I'm not a big fan of this label, I must admit, but hey, millennials get it, I guess, I don't know. It's a 25-year-old single malt from an undisclosed distillery.
So it's not coronavirus then?
Definitely not coronavirus. It's a batch of 3,124 bottles at 48.7%. So there are 8 distilleries. There were, I think there's 9 now. Can you tell which one it is? So 25 years old, suggestion that distillation, I know this distillate when we bottled this first time. So this would have come, distillation 92, 93. So that rules out Kilhoman that came on board at 2005. So that narrows it down to 7.
Yeah.
Working out how to count. I think we can rule out Blunahaven. I mean, I just started reading as soon as I was given this and tasted it. I remember tasting the cow sample, like going into the office and said, Dave, I'm glad you're here, try this. Jeepers, what's that? So my first impressions, I knew exactly what I thought it was immediately. And I thought, hang on, it can't be. It must be that. And no, but I went through it. So we'll go through this here. So I think we can rule out Bunna. Although they were peating pre-63, when they rebuilt the distillery, I don't think they really started using peated barley until the late 1990s. I've had 97 heavily peated 13-year-old Brunner, which was banging, but I don't think they were using peated malt before that. And certainly Bruichladdich weren't producing peated spirit at that time either, as far as I can work out. I know they produced a heavily peated spirit for, I think, 3 months. When the boys from Jura, no, 6 weeks, when the boys from Jura came in and made some heavily peated spirit for fillings at that time when the distillery was supposedly closed. Bamor, a much lower ppm, 25 ppm in the malt. I've also tasted this against some similar age Bamor, and I'm pretty convinced it's not Bamor.
There's no FWP.
No FWP.
There was a question about FWP before, and Google it. We're not going to say it.
Yeah, one of FWP for the win. So yeah, I didn't think this was Bamor. My initial impressions when I first tasted this was Ardbeg. But then I thought, well, no, it can't be. Ardbeg closed in March 81 and remained closed until 89. And then it reopened for a little while. Between 89 and 96, it was running for 2 months of the year using malt from the Port Ellen maltings, and it is a strong possibility, as are Lefroy, Lagavulin and Caol Ila. And logic, 95% of all unnamed Islay whiskies are Caol Ila. Like they are, because it's the biggest distillery on Islay, and nearly everything is, most independent bottles of Islay whiskey are generally Caol Ila, because it's one of those big distilleries that's a lot of whiskey is made. So I went over to, took this actual bottle over to Islay last year and sat down with Georgie Crawford, who was at that time just moving over from Lagavulin to the new Port Ellen, and John Campbell from Lefroy again. And I know it's not Lagavulin because I know there isn't enough 25-year-old, and we bought a lot of this stuff. This was at the time our biggest ever batch at 3,000 bottles, and I know we have another batch of it, and we put stuff back out in America. I'm still convinced this is Ardbeg. So the distillery was running, and I spoke to John Campbell, and we came up, it was either Lefroy or Ardbeg. We're convinced on that. And say the boys from Lefroy were running Ardbeg at that time for those 2 months, and they were chucking it into anything. It was 2 months of fillings. They were keeping the distillery, although they closed it down, they were both owned by the same people at that time. They closed that distillery. They should have closed it, and killed off their competitor immediately. They had the opportunity to do that, but they didn't. They kept it open. They were trying to sell it as a going concern. That's why they kept it open. Although it was, if you read, there's a great book called Pete Smoke and Spirit. Yeah, I'm just looking at the library here. Yeah, Pete Smoke and Spirit. I mean, all of the stories of Islay are in here. It's a great book. If you want to know anything about Islay, I think it's just been released. It's one of my favourite books, called Pete Smoke and Spirit. This is the original one, Andrew Jefford. I think it's called. It's been re-released. Something about Islay these days, but this is. I think it's been updated a little bit. All the distillery information in there is way out of date these days, but I'm convinced this is Ardbeg. It was all of those fillings. When the distillery was bought in 97 by Glenmorangie, or McDonald family that owned Glenmorangie at that time, and they sold out to Moët Hennessy in 2004. So they would have inherited these 2 months of every year between 91, 96, 89, 96. So they had all these 1-year-old, 2-year-old, 3-year-old, 4-year-old, 5-year-old spirits in a multitude of casks. And you've got to remember, at that time, whiskey was worth nothing. At that time, casks of whiskey, I just think they were just thrown away in the family vaults and forgot about, because it had no pedigree. It had no, the casks were of unknown origin, so they chucked them away. And hid them in the vaults, and I just, detective work really, basically. And equally, it could be Lefroy as well. I have no idea. seriously, I have no idea. But I know it's not Kalila. It doesn't have that signature Kalila. I know it doesn't have. It's not Lagavulin because there just wouldn't have been enough to. It just wouldn't have enough Lagavulin around.
No.
It's one of those things though that I think we get stuck in our own heads because we all do assume Kalila straight away because that's the only one that's got the stock. When was the last time anyone drank a 25-year-old Ardbeg? You know, particularly in Australia, to have some like there was the 19-year-old that came through recently, but to have that sort of reference point. Lucky enough to have tried a little bit, you know, and Ardbeg from the 70s and that sort of thing. And there's definitely some things here. My first on the nose, going exactly against what you were saying, was I thought Lagavulin straight away.
Okay.
Just because I was pulling back to, I think it was actually some Cadden Heads undisclosed bottlings who are a little bit younger, but had a very similar nose from what I remember, that were proposed to be Lagavulin. On the palate though, that sort of that ashiness and that sootiness is very more Ardbeg than Lagavulin.
With Lagavulin, I always get this heaviness, earthiness, like bitter chocolate. Doesn't have that. It's too tropical, too fruity.
Yeah, it's not on the palate, but on the nose, I was like, yep, that's what it is. And then sort of trying it, I went away.
Yeah, that tropical fruitiness of old Laphroaig does seem. I have tasted this against 25-year-old Laphroaig. We were in Whisky Festival in New York last year, and we had this batch in New York, and the Laphroaig guys came across and said they had their 25-year-old Laphroaig, and we tasted them against each other, and there was a noticeable difference between them. But like I said, I've had 2 Springbanks distilled and casked exactly the same day that are, just from casks. But this is a big batch, so it's a multitude of casks. You can see it's a gorgeous nut brown colour. And I was speaking to John Campbell last year, and he was saying if it is Ardbeg, it would have been thrown into any cask because it was just fillings. They were just doing it to keep the distillery open. I'm still convinced it is, and the reason why we're not allowed to name it is because we probably bought it from the family. So we are, as an independent bottler, we did bottle 2 batches of Glenmorangie. And nobody's bottled Glenmorangie independently. But we didn't name it. We just had this gruesome label of the 12 Swan Men. And I had both batches, a 15 and a 21-year-old, at Whisky Show in London that year. And I managed to grab Dr. Bill and say, hey, you've got to come try this. And his first words were, where the did you get that from? It must be teaspooned. Okay, that was his exact words. I cut that bit out for you. If you listen to the podcast, we don't cut anything out. It is complete nonsense.
So I made a joke at the start of the stream saying that, you just make sure you don't swear during the whole tasting, because we don't do that here. Anyone who has been to an oak barrel tasting in the flesh, stay stuck. But Dave's he's taken it to heart. He's been very good. Hasn't sworn the whole time.
I've been very, very good. Yeah, I was really... my mother brought me up properly, kicking and screaming most of the time, but she dragged me up properly. Where the did you get this? And we said, no, it's a single malt. We didn't name it. So we just had this gruesome label. We called it Secret. Secret Distillery number 2. We had these 16 gruesome Swan Men. And on the second batch, it was a port cask. And so we had everything looking through sort of rose-tinted spectacles of these Swan Men, and they were all facing the looker through the glasses, and they all had these great big cheesy grins, and they did sort of all look a little bit like Dr. Bill. So look out for that label. It's so funny. It makes me laugh every time I see it.
I'm a little bit conscious of time, and while we are enjoying ourselves and have nothing else to do, there is someone else in this stream who has a full day of work ahead of them, let alone podcast recording. I've actually just put a poll up. I'd be interested to see what everyone's favourite whiskey is. But now's the time to get in last minute questions, if anyone's got any. But we've had a bit of an issue going live to Facebook and the YouTube, but we'll work on that and post this video up there when we can a little bit later. But thank you for everyone for joining us as well. I just want to catch up on a few more comments. I know Trish is in here. She's actually had the stream up with her own looks like cheese and crackers board with a FaceTime with a few of their friends that are in here as well. So there's like tastings within tastings going on at the moment, which is really cool.
Inception.
And the book that you posted apparently is in a downstairs toilet of one of our guests here tonight. So lots of fun. I'll post around that link, and as well what Dub pointed out, there's a few more whiskies that boutique things, whiskey or otherwise, because a couple of gins in the country as well that I'll email them out to you guys probably tomorrow morning when I can see that. But yeah, feel free to email. You've all got my details now with the link to what was going on tonight. So feel free to send me any questions or any follow-up. We've got the second boutique tasting on sale at the moment. We were just starting to pack up those orders today to get out to people.
28th of April.
Yep. So go to oakbarrel.com.au/event for all of those things coming up. But I think we've got lineups now for 3 boutique tastings. And then by then, I think probably that third one will be mid-May. We'll hopefully have some other stuff that we can find. But Dave, congratulations on breaking your Australian tour draft.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a lot of fun. This is the best morning I've had for a long time, I'm telling you.
Well, Dave, when we can bring you out here, we'd love to have you here in the flesh as well. So thank you so much for giving up your morning and speaking boutique with us.
And thank you very much. And I as you can probably see on the chat, there's a lot of people coming through showing their appreciation for yourself, Dave. But also, just something I want to say very quickly from an Oak Barrel point of view, we bottle a lot of whiskies, whether they're independent or official bottlings, as exclusives for events that we do. And we did look at boutique a little while ago, a couple of years ago, and it didn't quite fit the bill, but I know that we've been speaking about this. But I might actually get Joe Perry, if he's still in the room somewhere, to take a photo of our setup here, because there are more cords and computers and now glassware than I've ever seen in one room. And I think if we ever did an Oak Barrel exclusive, I've got the label. It's here, it's written. It's just an army of laptops ready to go. But yeah, thanks again, Dave. We really appreciate it. Sorry.
If anyone's got any questions, you can always find me on social media. I am Boutique Dave on Twitter and Instagram. I live in Twitter. It's a little village just north of London. So that's where I live most of my life, on Twitter. We'll be online every day. I say Sam and I are online on the Instagram channel at Boutique Whisky, and certainly dig out the podcast and have a listen. We talk a little bit about whiskey history. We talk to whiskey people. We've had Dave Broom in the room. We've had Rob Allinson from Whiskey Magazine in the room. We're always looking for people to talk to. Whiskey's about people, and that's what we want.
I think Wake Up Wingo was a great piece you guys did.
Wake Up Wingo, yeah, that was a great. We had Wingo on the other lunchtime as well.
Great.
One person I do want to thank as well is Dub and the Proof & Co team who've really made this all possible. And yes, it is my fault that we are doing such expensive whiskies. And so if you do want to buy anything, please do, because I think the boss is actually on this stream and I don't want to have to admit that we're breaking even on this one. So any bottle sales help. But yeah, there's another boutique one already on sale. We're doing a bunch of things, including the Glen you were talking about, I think is in the next one. And then, we've got a line up for the third one. But again, thank you everyone from wherever you are. There's people from Victoria, and yes, we apologize about those issues, but we'll have this video to show. And as you say, ask us any more questions if you think of them later.
Thank you so much, team. Appreciate you guys tuning in.
Cheers.
Yeah, thank you very much for tuning in this evening.
Drink whiskey, be happy.
Yeah.
Wash your hands.
Yeah, don't forget to wash them.
Bricks or otherwise.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers.
I'm going to sign out.
Yeah.
See you, mate.
Bye.
I'll just chill here for a bit on the stream. So anyone who's still talking to each other, because when I leave, I'll cancel the meeting. But that was a bit of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.